The Heritage Council began working on the Faith Communities Biodiversity Initiative a couple of years ago. We were inspired to take up this work by the commitment made by the Irish Catholic Bishops' Conference in 2023, asking parishes to manage 30% of church grounds for nature by 2030, stemming from Pope Francis's Laudato Si encyclical in 2015, inviting people of all faiths to come together to take action on the climate and biodiversity crises. Jane Mellett, who's speaking next, will touch more on this. There's been great leadership and practical work over the past few years by many organisations and many faiths, some of whom will speak here today. Several local authority biodiversity officers supported by the Heritage Council are also working on the ground with parishes and faith groups to provide the biodiversity expertise and support for practical actions in suitable areas. These include altered mowing regimes, pollinator planting, orchards, bird and bat boxes, signage and community engagement. And you'll hear lots more about these actions and how to go about them later in the webinar. We developed and published our Havens for Nature booklet over the past year. The idea was to develop a go-to guide for setting out simple, achievable actions that faith communities can take for biodiversity and wildlife on their grounds. It draws together biodiversity objectives and best practices, from across the country and across faith traditions, and translates these biodiversity objectives into practical actions that also respect the sensitivities of burial grounds, historic fabric and living communities. We launched the booklet in January with Minister Christopher O'Sullivan in Kilkenny. And thank you to everyone who worked on us with the booklet, which was many people, and on the launch. I'll link it in the chat after the presentation. Also, please email me if you'd like some printed copies for your group. We're always happy to post out printed copies to anyone. And we also have a version of Gaeilge, which I'll also link in the chat. Now on to our exciting agenda for this evening. Up first, we've got Jane Mellett, who's church manager with Trócaire, and she'll be speaking about the Laudato Si initiative and return to nature and more. She'll be followed by Kate Chandler from the National Biodiversity Data Centre, who will be talking about simple and effective pollinator actions you can take. Next, we have Satwinder Singh, who is EcoSikh Ireland's chairperson. The Sikh community are initiating many impactful and community-focused actions. We then have Reverend David White, Rector at the Zion Church of Ireland, Parish in Rathgar in Dublin. He'll speak about their Green Zion project, the work of Eco Congregation Ireland, and other Church of Ireland actions. He's followed by Jennie Drysdale, Chairperson of Doonbeg Tidy Towns in Clare, talking about the Return to Nature Doonbeg Church Biodiversity Project in the Killaloe Diocese. Finally, we've Paul McNamee, who's active with the Sunyata Buddhist Centre in Clare. After all this rich input, we aim to have about 20 minutes for the speakers to answer your questions. So you can type your questions at any time in the Q&A box. It should be visible on your screen. Or if you can't see it directly on your screen, there's an icon that says more, and if you click that, you should be able to click into the Q&A box. So you can write in your questions at any point through there. The speakers, we can answer your questions in the box, or we might save them and answer them in the question time at the end. Yeah, so a couple of more things it should be finished up by 8:45. So I'll stop sharing, and a couple more things to mention before we go to the speakers. As I said, we're recording this webinar and it will be made available on YouTube afterwards. And then some of you might have heard, but there's a conference in Knockshrine on Saturday, the 29th of August on the Church Return to Nature project there and in general. So I'll pop the details in the chat box now where you can get more information and register. And it should be a really good event, and there'll be a tour of the grounds and what actions they're taking. Yeah, so I'll hand it over to Jane to go first.
Great, thanks, Maeve, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. So just Maeve is going to share some slides, hopefully, now in a moment. So my name is Jane Mellett. I work as the church manager in Trócaire, and I'm also a member of the Laudato Si working group of the Irish Bishops' Conference. And we work really closely with the global Laudato Si movement to help to bring Laudato Si to life in church communities across the island of Ireland. And we hopefully you've heard of Laudato Si before, but for those who haven't, Laudato Si is a wonderful document, Pope Francis's letter to everyone living on this planet, where he asks us to care more deeply for our common home and really urges us to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor at this time. And as part of the response of the Irish Church to that call of Pope Francis, you can move on there, May, please. In 2023, the Irish Bishops' Conference invited parishes to return 30% of church grounds back to nature. And this was in response to the Biodiversity COP15, where an international treaty had been signed, encouraging countries and asking countries to do the same. And a conversation would have happened at the Laudato Si working group level, inspired by Father Sean McDonough. What would this look like if we were to witness as a church community to what the international community is being invited to do? And there were, of course, other motivations, Laudato Si, but also the fact that as people of faith, we are invited to care for God's creation. Part of the bishop's statement there, you'll see in the bottom of the screen, says humanity is called to care for the earth and all of its creatures. In other words, to live out our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork. So Pope Francis was really clear in Laudato Si that this is part of what it means to be Christian in today's world, but he also extended that invitation to every single person living on the planet. So moving on there to the next slide, just to share some reflections from Laudato Si on the why of this call. That acknowledgement that 70% of wildlife has gone since 1970 in our world due to human activity. And Pope Francis lamented that loss and said, because of us, thousands of species no longer give glory to God by their existence, nor can they convey their message to us. We have no such right. And he invites us to look out at the world and to see the world as this infinite song of love and to really reflect on where we've been called to act in order to protect this. He says, how can we fail to care for this creation that's been entrusted to us? So moving on again, there's another quote here which is quite profound. He said that every species has an intrinsic value independent of their usefulness. That creation isn't just here for our use and certainly not for our abuse, but each species has a value within itself. Each organism, a creature of God, is good and admirable. So really inviting us to see ourselves as part of this web of life, but also as protectors of this web of life. So moving into our Havens for Nature contributions to Havens for Nature, we were so delighted to and continue to be delighted to collaborate with the Heritage Council on this initiative around Havens for Nature. Just around the same time that the Irish bishops were making this call, we were delighted to hear that biodiversity officers were being set up in their roles around the country. And there really has been a lovely collaboration between the biodiversity officers in the various counties and the respective dioceses. And we've seen some wonderful examples and witness of what can happen when these many community groups come together. And I suppose Havens for Nature expanded that circle of solidarity in that it embraced the call to other faith communities, so that we can make a little more room for life on our faith grounds across the country and creating corridors and stepping stones for biodiversity. So just in the next slides, part of Havens for Nature, we wanted to, of course, share the richness of Laudato Si with communities, but to also celebrate and acknowledge the deep richness of the spiritualities of the other faith communities and the various scriptures and traditions and their own calls to caring for creation. And just to share one or two with you here this evening, in the Sikh tradition, we read, air is the guru, water is the father, earth is the great mother of all. In the Hindu tradition, I am the fragrance of the earth, the heat and the fire, I am the Lord of all that lives. And Havens for Nature is a really beautiful booklet, very practical booklet, but you'll find sprinkled throughout these wonderful reflections from the various faith traditions on care for creation. Just moving on there to share a couple more with you. We read from Islam, have you not considered how Allah sets forth the parable of a good word being like a good tree whose root is firm and whose branches are in heaven? It's really inviting us into these reflections on the relationship between our spirituality and faith and the Creator. And in the Jewish tradition, when God created the first humans, God led them around the trees of the garden and said, see my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. Think of this and do not corrupt or destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one to put it back together. So many rallying calls and sources of inspiration for us in these scriptures and in these texts. So just moving on to the next slide there, I just want to share with you briefly what has happened within the Catholic community since Return to Nature and indeed Havens for Nature has been published. And this is just a small example. This project really has exploded around the country, and we've seen in places like Kinsale Parish and Killorglin, the biodiversity gardens, tree planting across County Clare, who are steaming ahead in the Diocese of Killaloe with Barry O'Loughlin, the various churches who are embracing return to nature. You'll see there the meadows that have been allowed to flourish, plant ID workshops, more tree planting, and so on. And my own parish in Tala Village, the Priory, has just begun and teamed up with Dodder Action Group to bring the grounds of that area to rewild and restore nature in that area as well. And these are just a small sprinkling of examples of how the Catholic community has embraced this initiative, and we'll hear from many other traditions tonight who have also taken up the call. So we'll see our churches are places where our communities gather, but they're also places that can become areas for the flourishing of biodiversity and creation. And just lastly there, I think this is my last slide. Yep, hopefully I haven't gone over time, Maeve. But just to leave you maybe with this question and another reflection from Laudato Si, that the invitation is maybe to stop seeing our church grounds or faith grounds as land that we have to maintain, but to see them as part of creation we're entrusted with, and an area that can become a deeply nourishing area for contemplation, for biodiversity, where species can flourish and where our communities can flourish more deeply as well. And to leave you with a quote from Pope Francis, who says, the world is a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise. So thanks very much. I'll leave it there.
Thanks a million, Jane. That was lovely. Next up, we have Kate Chandler from the National Biodiversity Data Centre. She's an ecologist, so an expert on all things biodiversity, and she's going to talk about actions you can take for pollinators to get started. I will get her slides up now. Oh, it's back to Jane's. 1 second. Okay. There you are, Kate.
Thanks, Maeve. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Jane, for your talk. It was really interesting, and it's just so inspiring to see how much work has already been done and how enthusiastically so many different groups have taken up transforming the way we manage the grounds of our faith community and wider as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the type of actions that you might be able to take on your grounds for pollinators in particular. And the reason for that is what part of my role is working for the All Island Pollinator Plan, which is coordinated by the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And we were really delighted to contribute to the Havens for Nature booklet. A lot of the content that we contributed was from our booklet, Managing Faith Communities for Pollinators. And I think there's a little screen pop-up of it there. If someone clicks onto the next slide, it should appear. Nope, maybe not. Oh, there it is. Fantastic. There it is. So some of you may have seen that before, but that basically all sorts of ways that you can help pollinators in particular on your faith grounds. And we sometimes get asked why pollinators. And the answer to that is, thinking about our name, the National Biodiversity Data Centre, we gather and store and record data around Ireland's biodiversity. And it was about 2015. The All Ireland Pollinator Plan was established by Dr. Una Fitzpatrick and Professor Jane Stout of Trinity in response to data that was showing that pollinators were in decline, and particularly bumblebees. There's a really valuable ongoing monitoring scheme that we run, the Bumblebee Monitoring Scheme, which some of you may be familiar with or even participate in yourselves. And the data from that was showing that our bumblebees were in decline. Since then, I'm pleased to say that what we're finding is that where actions are being taken locally, local populations of pollinators are actually increasing. Rare pollinators in particular are particularly responsive, but overall pollinator numbers are still in decline. So we still have a lot of work to do. And what we find as well is that once you're helping pollinators and once you take action for pollinators, you're also helping biodiversity more widely as well, because the role that they play in the world of nature really underpins everything. They pollinate about 78% of our wild plants, our food crops as well. So if we're saving the bees, we're saving everything, including ourselves as well. So if we maybe go on to the next slide. I'm just going to go very quickly right back to the start and talk a little bit about what pollinators are, which might sound obvious, but there's some things that might be a little bit surprising. And the first of those facts is that there's over 100 different types of species of bee on the island of Ireland. And I think when we think of bees, we often think of honeybees or maybe bumblebees, but most of the bees we have in Ireland are what we call solitary bees. So most of them would be nesting in the ground, or they might be nesting in insect hotels that some of you might have on your walls or in your faith grounds. And they often don't look like bees at all. So it's really amazing when you sort of dig into it a bit more, the variety of life that we have on this island. And this is a solitary bee here, the tawny mining bee on the left. Then you've got one of our bumblebees here, the white-tailed bumblebee, and this is our one native honeybee, the Irish black bee. And then, of course, we've got other insects that pollinate as well. Moths, really, really important. Often don't think about them because they do their job at night time, but really, really important pollinators, and butterflies and some other insects as well. Hoverflies, also really, really important. So what's the problem if we go on to the next slide? As I mentioned, the numbers are in decline, and in Ireland, 1/3 of our bee species is threatened with extinction. 78% of our wild plants are pollinated by insects, and globally, just looking at that global picture, 100 crops provide about 90% of the world's food, and of these, 71 are pollinated by bees. So that underscores why these creatures are really, really important to us. But as we know and as we've heard, they also deserve a landscape that supports them for their own sake. So there's all sorts of reasons why we should protect them, and it helps with our health and well-being and all sorts of other benefits as well. So it's a no-brainer, really. And the good news is there are really, really simple ways that we can help them. And I'm going to go through those now for the next few minutes. Don't worry about remembering everything, recording everything. A lot of this is in the Havens for Nature booklet. And if it's not in there, it is on our website, pollinators.ie. There's all sorts of free resources there that delves into different aspects of pollinator conservation, including meadow management, pollinator-friendly plants. So don't worry about remembering all of this. This is just to give you an overview. So if we move on to the next slide, the first thing that you want to do when you're thinking about how you might be able to manage your faith grounds or any type of land for pollinators is identify and protect what's already there. And it can be really easy to kind of want to jump in and start doing something immediately, but I cannot overestimate the importance of this first step, because you might find that there's a lot already on your grounds that is providing a resource for pollinators, or indeed wider biodiversity as well. So this is a really, really important first step. And this on the right here is a picture from the Lacan Church in Wicklow, harvesting yellow rattle seeds. So the lovely area of wildflowers on the verges there with all sorts of species in it. So you want to kind of, even like literally as simply as doing a walk around your grounds with a green team, a few of you who are interested. And importantly, make sure whoever is on that team includes whoever is responsible for managing the church grounds. So if you have a caretaker, or someone who is responsible for managing the grounds in your faith community, make sure they're part of that team so they're on board and they know what's happening, and they'll have insight into certain things that you might not be aware of when you're walking around. And then just do that walk around, and you want to be looking out for areas that are maybe allowed to go a little bit wild, with wildflowers growing naturally. And I mean things like dandelions and clovers, not necessarily bright, colourful poppies, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But plants that we often overlook are often the ones that are really, really valuable. Dandelions are one of the most important food sources for pollinators. Areas that are a little bit scrubby and wild can provide really important nesting habitat. You might have ivy growing over old stone walls. Old stone walls themselves also really valuable as nesting habitat for cavity nesting bees. So as you're walking around, make a list of these resources and draw a map. And when you do that, you'll be able to get a picture of not only what's already there, but how they're connected with one another. And as a starting point, and it is a really useful exercise to kind of get started, figure out how you're going to protect them from any sort of threats, any sort of damage or depletion, and then think about how you might be able to enhance them and how you might be able to connect them and create those all-important corridors through our landscape. Solitary bees, so our largest type of bee, tend not to fly more than 200 meters to find food. So we would really love to see pockets of nature every 200 meters, so they really don't have to worry at all about finding food in the landscape, because that is one of the main drivers of pollinator decline is hunger, lack of food. So you also maybe want to consider if there are any invasive species to be aware of and to remove, because that's also a really significant threat to biodiversity. And if you're not sure about where to start, do link in with your local biodiversity officer. As we've already heard, they're doing fantastic work, and many of them are working a lot with faith communities already and have embedded this type of work into their new biodiversity action plans as well. So you can find details of who your local biodiversity officer is, I think, on the Heritage Council website, and they might be able to just point you in the right direction to get started. So if we could move on to the next slide. After you've done that, one of the next best things you can do is reduce mowing. And the reason this is really valuable is because when you reduce mowing and you do it over time, and when you do mow, you remove the grass cuttings, the soil fertility goes down and more variety of species can grow. A lot of our native wildflowers require low soil fertility to grow. They won't grow in lawns that are cut really regularly where the grass is allowed to rot back in. So it's a way of naturally creating areas of wildflowers. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can create what we call a short flowering meadow, which is a cut every 4 to 6 weeks, starting in mid-April. That's after the first bloom of dandelions. Or a long flowering meadow, which is a cut once a year in September, providing food and shelter. And this picture on the right is from St Michael and All Angels Church in Abbeyleix, who, as you can see, took a really creative approach to this action and cut a lovely design into their meadows there. They've got gorgeous meadows, and they've done it for a few years now, and they've had orchids appear and all sorts of gorgeous plants. You want to think really carefully about where you're doing this, because as you know yourselves, there'll be some areas on your faith community grounds where people need access, or there's quite high footfall, but there might be some areas, whether it's a corner of the grounds or a strip here and there, where you can leave it grow a little bit longer, and you can mix and match the different regimes as well. So there's all sorts of options. Mowing paths through it, really, really good way of explaining that that management is deliberate. And I'm actually, if we go on to the next slide, I've got a short little video that I just want to share from this same church. Hopefully it works. Oh, we can't hear the audio, but you can see the
parish. You can see
oh, there we go.
Our biggest project, I suppose, is here. We're standing here in the meadows at our Church of Ireland parish. You can see the church behind me, St. Michael and All Angels. And we approached them because these two fields were sitting here and they were being mown very regularly. They were quite short and not used that often. So we approached the rector and the select vestry here and asked, could we, could the mowing regime be changed? And they were great. They came on board, no problem. So we're standing here. This is the long flowered meadow, and then the one over there is the short flowered meadow. And once paths were mown through it, the public started coming in and using it and having picnics and whatever, and it's lovely.
Thanks, Maeve. So as you can see, I think there can be a little bit of wariness about the idea of reducing mowing, that idea that it's going to look quite messy. But as you can see in Abbey Leaks, and I know in other faith community grounds as well, it's actually been a huge success, and you're seeing plants that you never knew were there, and it looks gorgeous too. But it does take a little bit of time and patience and a little bit of explaining to everyone why you're doing it, what you're doing, why it's important. Then after that, one of the best things you can do is protect and plant native trees and hedgerows. So these will be species like willow, hawthorn, blackthorn, bramble. A lot of them flower very early in the year, like willow on the right here. So it's a really important source of nectar and pollen when there's not much else around. And then later on, their berries provide food for birds and other creatures as well. So the key thing, if you've got a hedgerow, is thinking about, again, cutting it a little bit less, because flowers and blossom tends to grow on older wood. So if you're cutting it every year when you don't need to, then that's not going to grow. It's not going to provide a food resource. So we'd suggest trying to cut once every 3 years if you have to, or 1/3 every year. Obviously, some places you have to more frequently, but thinking about cutting a bit less. Keep the base nice and grassy, because that's really popular for bumblebees to nest in. They'll nest in there. And if you're planting trees, just remember the 3 rules are right tree, so native local provenance trees where you can, or at least of Irish provenance. And the reason for that is if you're importing trees, sometimes that can import diseases. That's how ash dieback came into the country. And the trees that are local to your area they'll be perfectly adapted to bloom at exactly the same time. If in springtime you're down in South Waterford and you're seeing something blooming and you go up to Donegal and it's not blooming at the same time, it's all very carefully balanced, and your local native plants kind of know when the right time is to bloom, and then the pollinators emerge in succession at the right time. The next rule is the right place. So think about what's going to happen to your tree in the future. Is it going to drop fruit that might be a bother for car parks or places where people are going to walk? Is it going to grow too big for its space? And then right space, is there something that's already valuable for biodiversity there for a different reason? Like, for example, have you got wildflowers growing naturally there? Because we really do need a mosaic of different habitats to support pollinators, to support biodiversity. So moving on to the next slide, please.
Just 1 minute left, Kate, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Maeve, did you have a question?
1 minute, 1 minute. If you could finish up in 1 minute, sorry.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to whiz through this. Sorry, everyone. I was getting carried away there. Right, pollinator-friendly ornamental plants. Native plants are best because, as I've said, they've adapted, but there are options for non-native ornamental plants that are really good as well, some herbs and bulbs. This is from one of our guide's top 10 pollinator-friendly plants for different situations. So make sure that you have something in flower throughout the season. And I am going to skip a few bits now if we can move on to the next one. Another option, if you've got a bit of space, is creating a sensory garden. So fruit trees, lots of sweet smelling herbs. And on to the next one, please, Maeve. Eliminating pesticides is a really big one, so really damaging to pollinators, biodiversity, and human health. And again, it kind of comes back to celebrating what we consider weeds. But also, there are alternatives. If you do have to remove some unwanted plants, there are alternatives. That doesn't mean resorting to herbicides. On to the next slide, please, Maeve. Think very carefully about getting honeybee hives. So we saw earlier we had one native honeybee in Ireland, and all pollinators are important and have a role to play. But what we're finding is that studies are showing where we have too many hives, that can create competition with wild bees. And on to the next one, please. Same with wildflower seed mixes. They're really popular, but what studies are showing is that they often contain non-native species, despite what the packet says, and can inadvertently introduce invasive species. So keep them to pots and containers, really treat them like non-native plants. And the next one, please. So keep your insect hotels nice and small, because if they're large, they can encourage the spread of disease and attract predators. So we recommend no bigger than an average sized bird box. And next slide, please. And finally, spread the word. So you're in a really unique position as faith communities to be able to reach out to not just your faith community, but your wider community in general. Work with other groups who are trying to do similar things, your local schools, your tidy towns. The GAA have a Green Clubs program. All sorts of initiatives now happening, trying to do the same thing. So work together and integrate into your faith community activities as well. Spread the word on whatever channels you can, your newsletters, your websites. And final slide then, and then I will shut up. If you need to learn any more, obviously there's the Havens for Nature booklet, but there's also loads of resources on pollinators.ie. So thank you very much, and I'll finish up there. Sorry for running over, Maeve.
That's okay. It was really good information. Yeah, thank you so much, Kate. We'll move on to Satwinder Singh from EcoSikh Ireland. I will get his slides up now. Okay, there you go.
That's good. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Satwinder Singh, and I'm chairperson of EcoSikh Ireland. And thanks, Meadhbh and Heritage Council for giving us this opportunity to be part of this important conversation. There is a lot to learn from other groups. And those of you who don't know about EcoSikh Ireland is an Irish charity, an environmental group led by members of Irish Sikh community. Our mission is to preserve a natural environment of Ireland and enhance biodiversity. So in order to achieve this, we work with other groups. Our work is volunteer-led and community-oriented. And we focus on planting Irish native trees. And our nature of our work is collaborative. So all the project we have done in collaboration with other groups and communities. So in last year, we did a project. Our first project was in Sacred Forest. Can you move on to the? And yeah. So our first project was creating a sacred forest in Temple Glentine National School. It was a pilot project, and it was very important in a way that it was the first, and also the place we were created this project has a historical connection with the Sikh community. So we created a forest of 1,200 trees containing 11 Irish tree species. And 95% of the trees survived, not only survived, but showed excellent growth. And most of the tree achieved 4-meter height in just 18 months. And the planting was done in a Miyawaki style. That's the Japanese technique of making forest. And results, we are so impressed with the results that it's a biodiversity hotspot. Today we posted a video about this forest on EcoSikh Insta page. So those of you who are interested can go and watch this 2 to 3 minute video. And so building on from the learning from this project and success, so we were lucky that our partner were offered a 4-acre plot in Gracetown. And we again joined hands to create one of the largest Miyawaki-style forest in Europe. Over the period of 4 years, we planted 43,000 trees of 17 different Irish tree species. And it was such a good project to work on. And it's also a case study learning curve for us. So we did a lot of different things every year to see how we get results. Can you move on to next one? So again, in this forest, around survival rate is over 90%. So the tree we planted in 23rd has grown so well that it's really difficult even to walk through. It's so dense. And we did this with the help of volunteers. So we have hundreds of volunteers coming to plant trees over 8 weeks during 4 years. In 2025, we had one of the largest tree planting day in Ireland. Over 500 volunteers came together to plant 10,000 trees in a single day. And that was incredible. So nature of work, is collaborative. So we collaborate with other organizations to complement our skill and resources to make, a bigger impact. So why do we focus on native trees? Can you move on to next slide? So what we have seen that native woodlands create habitat in a very short span of time. It takes months, not decades. So when you are planting native forest, you are not planting trees, you are actually creating home for a lot of forms of life. It's a home for bees and pollinators, butterflies, moths, birds, mammals, So you see sign of life, coming back very quickly. And so that's, I think, best way to bring back biodiversity in our society. Ireland has a very popular kind of perception of being a very green country, but forest cover is around 11%. And out of that 11%, native woodland accounts for 2 to 3%, which is shockingly low. So I think the way forward is actually as we can plant more and more native trees and microforest. So the technique we use help us to reach the density and complexity of forest, 100-year-old forest in 10 years time. So you will be amazed how quickly these trees grows in a biodiverse forest. Can you move on to next slide? So the nature of our work, as I said, is a partnership. We are a community group, and we work with other community groups and volunteers to use our resources and times in a very efficient, effective, and impactful way. We are all volunteers, so we want to use our resources in a very efficient way. So we work with different groups actually to create a meaningful change in our biodiverse sphere. So if you want to help us, there is different ways you can help. If you have time, you can volunteer with us on our planting days. If you have money, you can sponsor trees. Ours is one of the most affordable tree planting project. So you can plant tree of your choice for cost of a cup of coffee. That's how cheap it is. And if you are a landowner, school, or community group and have a piece of land, we can work with you to create a micro forest. And that's how you can help. The one thing I want to share is when we were doing this biodiverse restoration, it also becomes another occasion actually for cultural interaction. So we are bringing people together who would have never met each other otherwise. So you're becoming people who don't know each other, bringing shovels and creating something very diverse. And that's also very, good to see happening in the society. And yeah, that's it. I hope I kept in time. Thank you so much.
That's brilliant, Satwinder, and thank you so much for all the work you're doing and the important messages there at the end. Really, really good. Next up, we have the Reverend David White. He doesn't have a presentation actually, so I'll let him take it away and speak to you about his work.
So much, Maeve. My name is David. I'm a Church of Ireland priest and I'm based in Rathgar in Dublin 6 at the moment. There's lots of projects going on right across the Church of Ireland, but I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in Rathgar. So the name of the parish is Zion. So we call it the Green Zion Project. It's a collaboration between the school, the primary school, and also the parish. So there's over 100 children in the primary school and then about 50 in our Sunday club within the parish itself. And there's two parts to the project. The first is thinking about pollinators. And it was great to hear Kate talking about the work of the National Biodiversity Data Centre, but also that wonderful All Ireland pollinator plan. And the part of that plan, which I love most, so she showed us the that wonderful Faith Communities booklet, is the page 6, where there are 24 actions, because so many parishes don't know where to start. And there's 24 things that people can choose to begin with. And the website pollinators.ie is great for signage as well, because it's important to explain to people what's happening. If grass is growing long around our churches, it's important to remind people that we're not just being lazy. Instead, we're doing something else. So, the second part of the project then is to think about food. So it's the right of every child to know where their food comes from, but also it's the right of every child to know how to grow food. So we put a lot of emphasis on trying to grow fruit and vegetables throughout the year. We have raised beds and we grow all kinds of things. And it's been very successful just to raise consciousness around where our food comes from and the impacts then our choices can have on the natural environment in terms of buying organic food, buying in season food, and where our food has to travel from in different parts of the world. And I mentioned the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, but also we're delighted to have the support of Eco Congregation Ireland. So that's an organisation of Christian churches from right across the island, and they have an award system. There are 4 levels: awareness, endeavour, the award, and gold award. And it's a way of, I suppose, drawing people in, but also encouraging parishes, because one of the first things parishes do is complete a checklist or an audit of what's happening in the parish. And when we did it, we realised we were doing an awful lot already, and there were some very obvious things that we could do to build on it. It's a very balanced approach as well, because they encourage looking at practical, spiritual, local, and global. So the practical is what we think about immediately: bug hotels, pollinator plantings, bird baths, those kinds of things. Spiritual, how in our services do we include prayers for the environment? Laudato Si, that Jane spoke about, as an important resource. Harvest, plough Sunday services, services to celebrate the season of creation, etc. And then local community, and Satwinder mentioned that the importance of linking in with local communities, tidy towns, maybe men's sheds, and then global. So being able to support communities who are facing challenges around global the climate change, but also how do you support those communities in practical ways. So the next stage then is we've just been successful with a grant application for the Climate Action Fund. So we're starting up a new project called the Community Garden Learning Hub at Zion. So we're going to put solar panels on the hall, more pollinator-friendly planting, composters, wormery, and also then a repair hub involving sewing machines. And a group of people will lead that to try and again raise consciousness around fast fashion and the recycling of secondhand clothes. So we're really excited about that and look forward to implementing all our plans over the next while. Then finally, one of the things we realized was that if we want to bring a real lasting change, and lots of us talk about conversion of heart and conversion of mind leading to conversion of behavior and choices, that we need to begin local and we also need to begin personal. And what I did last year was I published a little book called The Garden Soul, The Emotional Connection to More, which is encouraging seeing our garden spaces as opportunities to get closer to ourselves, but also get closer to nature. Because it's a tragedy that so many people don't know the names of our local native trees and plants. And because there's that division that between us and what we call the natural world, it's really, really, really problematic. So that was my small little effort, the Garden Soul, to try and encourage people to think a little bit more deeply about the natural world and the climate crisis. So what I always say to parishes and groups when I'm speaking to them, the best thing to do is to do something. Start small, because when we start small, a certain amount of energy grows around our efforts and it's easier to continue then. But I have to say, working with the children has been hugely energetic, and it bodes well for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. That was wonderful and so much going on. It's brilliant to see and hear. Yeah, I hope this is inspiring everyone so far. We have Jennie Drysdale next, who's again taking lots of action in the Killaloe Parish down in Clare. So I'll hand it over to her and she has some slides. So I will share her slides with you.
Well, good evening, everyone. And I'm going to start with two simple words, and that is 5 weeks. And that's how long it took to get the orchids to our church once we changed how we managed the grass. So that tells us that they had been there all along, quietly waiting, and all we did was give them space to grow. So how did this start? I think we've already touched on this. If we can move to the next slide, there's a good understanding of how this project started. So I would just like to recognize Jane and also Barry, our biodiversity officer from Clare, because they really spearheaded the first pilot project in 2004, where they started with 12 churches. And today in 2026, we have 23 churches that have joined the Return to Nature project. And when we think about it, church grounds are some of the oldest green spaces in a parish, and they hold memories of our loved ones. They have heritage and they have ecological value. And it's incredible to see what can emerge when we change and convert 30% of that ground over back to nature. So the project, if we move to the next slide, I look at this project as my birthday, my Christmas present, because this was truly a gift to Tidy Towns. Barry had everything wrapped up in this present, all the things that we needed to do. And really, as a community organization, we just had to open that box and implement the things that were in that box and got it to play. So the first thing on our gift or our Christmas present is a pollinator plan. And if we move to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the pollinator plan. We had a site visit from an ecologist who created a specific pollinator plan to our church. You can see on the right there, there's the land. So we have quite a big church and there's a lot of land to it. We had 10 items that were identified to improve the church grounds and returning back to nature. The photograph that you see there, what doesn't reflect is we were overwhelmed at this point, having 10 actions. What on earth are we going to do with those 10 actions, as well as take care of our regular Tidy Towns work? But you know what? Just like Kate said, she said, protect what you already have. So that was a learning for us. Out of those 10 actions, what can we protect that we already have? And then the other thing that was key for us in our action plan is, what is something that's low effort but has a high value or a high return in the end result? So let me talk about those two things. And if we move to the next slide, so one thing that is low effort and high return is to create that pollinator wildflower meadow. And Kate talked about creating that meadow as well. So we reduced our mowings. We actually do one cut a year, and that's in September. And we remove the cuttings and we simply give that land space to see what's going to emerge. We had several flower beds that were in the church. So what could we do to protect those? We added more pollinator plants, and we also started using ground covering growing plants in low areas that would help us with weeds and act as a weed barrier. So I started with two simple words, 5 weeks. What happened within 5 weeks? Maeve, if you can move the slide, we'll take a look at what happened after 5 weeks. So this is us after 5 weeks. And when you look at this, a lot of people say, oh, messy, untidy. But when you look at this wildflower meadow is alive. And we tend to protect things that are alive. So what we see within this meadow are some marsh orchids. We've got the common spotted orchid. We've got cuckoo flower growing. We have self-heal, which you see a lot of in the right, and also bird's foot trefoil. And this is where the butterflies come out, the bees come out, the insects come out, and it truly is alive. Now, you kind of got a glimpse on the next slide, but this was the best ambassador that we could have for this project, and that's the Doonbeg hedgehog. He moved into the wildflower meadow, and this was incredible because this has created conversations after Mass. People were saying, have you seen the hedgehog? People were remembering the last time they saw a hedgehog. And some people said, this is the first time I've ever seen a hedgehog. So this is where biodiversity becomes personal because people are able to tell stories about it. So those were the two actions that we took in 2024. Let's take a look at what we did in 2026. So our focus this year, we went to high effort, high return. So the top picture shows a memorial to babies. It's very overgrown, it's been neglected, and the plants that were planted in the early 80s were very ornamental. There was no such thing as pollinator-friendly plants there. We all went for ornamental plants. So this year we completely gutted the 2 beds there and replaced them with pollinator-friendly plants. I took this photograph just 2 days ago, and although this memorial is a remembrance, it's a reflection, it's also joyful when you're standing there and you're seeing the butterflies jump and hop from plant to plant, and you see the bees coming in, getting pollen. So something that really made an impact. It was high effort, but it was really high return. So let's move on to the next slide. We took a lot of workshops, and this is where we introduce citizen science to our parishioners. So we no longer became observers, we were recorders of the earth. We planted apple trees. This is right by our meadow. So again, getting back to what Kate said, when you're planting, make sure right tree, right place, right time. We have the meadow right there as well. And we're planting native Clare apple trees from Irish Seed Savers in North Clare. And this is what connects biodiversity within a culture. It's woven through it, because just like Reverend Dave said, children recognize apples. They know where apples come from. I have a distinct memory of gathering apples with my granny, going into her kitchen and making apple tart. So it's woven and connected into that heritage. Other things that we did was we did webinars. So if we can move to the next slide, we did quite a few webinars, and this encouraged wider participation within the parish. So we got training in pollinators. We also got training in barn owl ecology and swift ecology. And this is taking our horizon beyond the church gates. So if we take a closer look at some of the things that we did with barn owls and swift ecology on the next slide, we installed swift boxes in buildings that had the right height for the behavior pattern of flights of the swifts. Unfortunately, Doonbeg was a little on the short side, so we don't have swift boxes, but we do have barn owl nest boxes. And we also have bat boxes as well too, and bird boxes. So we installed the barn owl boxes with local farmers in their hay barns. So we're bringing farmers in to the project, and we're creating some nesting opportunities for species that are under pressure with habitat loss. It's really interesting. Within the 23 churches that are on this project, there's now a WhatsApp group amongst all the farmers, and they have competitions sending photographs of their owls. And we had a baby owl born this year, so great excitement within there. But this, I think, is the strength of the project for me, because biodiversity doesn't recognize fences or boundaries. It's everywhere. So when we take a look at the impact that this project has had on the next slide, I look at it as if having visible and invisible impact. So visible is in the species that are returning and the wildflowers that are growing. Invisible is the change in the mindset. We have more pride, we have more awareness, and there's more curiosity with everyone knowing and understanding biodiversity. And I'm going to bring up tidy towns. If we go to the next slide, although all the volunteers in Tidy Town say we're not in it for the competition, we're just not in it for the competition. But come that day of the results, we're all about the competition. So our score in nature and biodiversity in our locality has increased 13% over the last 4 years. And I have to share with you that last year we had 1 point more than the overall winner had in the biodiversity category. So the standard has been set for Doonbeg as far as that goes. So in closing, going back to those 2 words, 5 weeks, that's what it took to get orchids back in our church grounds. And all we did was change 1 simple management practice. We mowed the grass once, we took out the cuttings, and we let see what would grow. So this project has really shown us that small changes, like reducing your mowing, removing the cuttings, planting more native species, and installing habitat boxes really can deliver those measurable results. And this project really is proof that the wider biodiversity plan can be achieved when communities act. So thank you very much for letting us share our story.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was all brilliant to hear. And yeah, such a motivated, practical group. Finally, we have Paul McNamee from the Sunyata Buddhist Center. He's our final speaker, and then we can move on to the questions and answers. So yeah, don't forget if you have a question to type it in, and thank you for everyone who's wrote in their questions so far. I will get Paul's presentation shared now. Okay.
Thanks very much, Maeve, and thanks to all the previous speakers. Very inspiring stuff. So, I'm a member of the community at Sunyata Buddhist Center, and over the past 10 years, I've kind of been involved there in helping take care of the woodland. And so I suppose I'm just going to share a little bit of our kind of localized example of what we've seen there at the center. So I just go into the first slide, maybe to give you a bit of context about the Sunyata Buddhist Center. So we're nestled in the hills of East Clare, and it was established in 1998. So the picture in the top right that you see there, it was a working farm before it became a Buddhist retreat center. So those were kind of outhouse buildings that have been renovated and turned into a contemplation hall and accommodation. So Sunyata offers retreats and workshops for people that are into exploring Buddhism, mindfulness, and meditation. So a retreat center, I suppose, in the Buddhist tradition, a big part of it is being nestled away in nature. And over the past 28 years, it's interesting to see how a kind of a greenfield farm has transformed into different types of wild and native landscapes. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just talk more about that. So we have cultivated gardens, we have a woodland, ponds, there's a stream and a very small waterfall, and then kind of large areas that have gone into natural regeneration. So just going to the next slide. So I suppose an important kind of context is the Buddhist precept that the center kind of operates under, which is to refrain from taking the life of any living being. So a lot of the things that have kind of happened at Sunyata, I find it interesting because they're kind of almost accidental knock-on effects from this particular principle, because it means that we have to be a little bit creative in terms of how we design things. And also, I suppose, the Buddhist kind of practice of using nature as a space of contemplation. So in the Buddha's own story, he went into the jungle to practice, cultivate meditation and develop insight. So an appreciation of nature is really kind of embedded into the practice. And I suppose over time, it becomes reflected in the landscape of a center like Sunyata. So just go on to the next slide. So the woodland, it's really amazing to see for me, like what can happen in, I suppose, in anyone's lifetime. That's over the course of 25 years. And we have trees that are, 40 foot high. So when you walk in there, it feels like a proper woodland. It's managed sustainably for contemplation and biodiversity. There's simple paths. It's also managed continuous over style, which means that we take out small amounts of wood for firewood or to thin, but always to improve the health of the woodland itself. So in this particular tradition of Buddhism, as I said, there's this idea of going into the forest. So we go into the forest to kind of practice meditation. So just go to the next slide. So this on the left here you see is a meditation cabin that's in the woodland. So it's, as a woodland, it's kind of connected just by chance to an ancient Irish woodland, an SAC, through a stream. And it's amazing to see, like, already there's red squirrels, there's badgers, there's hedgehogs, there's foxes, there's pine martens. So once the kind of space is created, that nature really moves in. And the name Sunyata, which is the name of the Buddhist center, it points to a Buddhist concept that behind what appears as separate beings, that all beings are from one source. So this is one of the reasons that going into the forest practice is such an important part in the Buddhist tradition. So we can go to the next slide. So there's also grassland, a small vegetable garden. So about 2 or 3 acres, as other speakers have said, something similar is happening in Sunyata. So grassland's allowed to grow naturally with paths cut. We have some areas that support pollinators and a lot of native plants. So approximately 2 to 3 acres is kind of in a semi-cultivated state. And so one of the other principles that we have, and also for people who come on retreat at Sunyata, is that during the time of retreat, we try to all keep the precepts of not harming living beings. So even the rooms have little bug catchers. Obviously, we have, you know, if birds happen to nest in any of the buildings or anywhere around, we have to work around that. And also because of that principle, there's no chemicals or any kind of anything that would harm, intentionally harm a being is not allowed. So it's kind of interesting to see we had bees move in to the kitchen, and in the wall of the kitchen eventually took over half of the wall. So sometimes you have to try to come up with creative solutions. Yeah, so just go into the next slide. And a lot of it is actually non-intervention. And again, I suppose like there's a kind of the kind of ethos is that if we're going to change a space from its natural expression, then we have to justify that change. So there's a lot of areas that are in you know, grown with briars, nettles, wildflowers. Kind of natural regeneration is happening there. So it's also kind of interesting to see you've got the planted forest, but then you have natural regeneration happening by itself in other parts of the grounds. And go to the last slide. Yeah, so just it's a kind of something famous from the Buddhist tradition. So equating how we relate to other beings as a mother relates to her only child. So with a boundless heart, should we cherish all living beings? So that's a little bit about Sunyata.
Thanks a million, Paul. That was lovely to hear.